Okay, I don't know what we're going to call whatever this is that we're doing, but you definitely cannot call it brunch. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Trippett. No, I wasn't umming because I couldn't remember my name. I just had a weird transition there. My name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. This is a special Saturday evening live stream on a very, very important topic. We are on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we are on Twitter. So thank you for everybody who's showing up and will show up, because it's going to be a very interesting discussion, I hope. Well, not I hope, I think it is. It just all depends upon how it's presented. And hopefully your presenter is up to the task. So we're on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we're on Twitter. Thank you for all the tweets and Truth Socials and Gettrs and everything you guys have been sending out. This is going to be a very different sort of a thing. So let me start dropping the volume on the music right now and start getting into this, because we have got a lot to wade into. I suppose I need to start first with some apologies to you, my audience, and kind of explain what's going on here. Last week was amazing on so many different levels and continues to be amazing. This whole being a social media content creator kind of a guy I'm still trying to figure my way through this crazy world. There's things going on that I do not understand. And by that, I mean, I've got a very interesting, weird situation right now. I did a video about 3 or 4 days ago. It was a follow-up video about the border security bill in the Senate. Well, for some reason, that sucker's just taking off and running like a mad fiend. It's got like almost 600 views on it, which for my channel is just anything above 100 is a really good day. Anything on that level is like, go baby, go. And that's awesome to be happening. So I'm very joyous about that. But last week was an absolutely crazy week for me. I think I did like three or four videos. We did two live streams. One was an interview and one was the Supreme Court case. And when I got to Friday, mind and body were about fried. On top of that, the normal amount of show prep work that I do on a Friday evening just kept getting interrupted to the point that I couldn't, there's no way, because by the time I finally got uninterrupted, it was like 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and I just looked at the clock and went, ain't no way in the world I can get all this together by 10:30 in the morning. So that one's on me. Okay. That sort of explains why we're doing this at 5 o'clock in the evening. And that sort of gets to my second apology, which I don't know if I should even call it an apology as much as maybe just an audible. Normally, when you guys get together with me on a Saturday, we're doing, multiple topics on many number of different things. And was my full intention. And one of the things I want to talk about was the interview. Oh, I absolutely agree with that, Gypsy. February 8th was absolutely exhausting. And just totally amazing. And it's that February 8th thing that's gonna get into what we're gonna get into next here. One of the topics that I fully intended to talk about during Front Porch Brunch was and we're going to talk about it, by the way, was the Tucker Carlson interview of Vladimir Putin. And I sat down at my computer this morning, probably about 10:30, and started wading my way through that 2-hour interview. I'm not kidding. I just finished putting together all the clips at about 4:30 this afternoon. I've got 28, maybe 29 different clips from that interview that we're going to talk about. Biba Duba Dadi. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He even comes up in these clips, believe me. Not necessarily about his mental state, but you get where I'm going with this. And I thought to myself, there's no way. There's no way I can do a live stream. We'd be here till 10 o'clock at night if we did everything I really wanted to do past the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview. So finally, I just made the determination. I pulled an audible at about 4:30 in my brain, and I went, "Look, there ain't no way. We're doing one topic because we could spend hours on this, and that's probably what we're going to wind up doing." So, if you are here with the intention that we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, or we're going to talk about the special counsel's report, which all of them are very important subjects. Don't worry. And at some point I will be talking about them. I promise you. I don't know if it's going to be a video or another live stream. I'm thinking maybe another live stream Monday night just to catch up on everything. You if you're coming here with the intention that those topics are going to be talked about, I apologize to you right now, because after I've gone through that interview with Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin, there's just no way. Like I said, if we did all three of them plus Hodgepodge Stew, we'd be here till midnight, because there is so much substantive in that interview between Putin and Tucker Carlson. It's just got to be talked about. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, I really started clipping through that interview at about 11, call it 11:45, 10:45, 11 o'clock this morning. I didn't finish till about 4:30. So we're talking, let's just say 10:45 for the sake of argument. 11:45, 12:45, 1:45, 2:45, 3:45, 4:45. We're all 6 hours of John McGarvey over on Rumble says, instead of an apology, just give us a 45-minute history lesson on the fedora. You dog, I love you. Yeah, I mean, I spent almost 6 hours just editing the clips of Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin's answers to the questions he was getting. And that is, I was like, yeah, I'm serious. It's just, there's so much meat on the bone in that interview. It's incredible. It's just incredible. So that gets, I guess, to my introductory comments about the interview. I have never seen, prior to it actually dropping, I had never seen anything like the reaction in the press, the gatekeeper media, official Washington, the progressive left, like I had seen to this idea that Tucker Carlson was going to interview Vladimir Putin. I mean, it's not like Vladimir Putin hasn't been interviewed by Western journalists before. I mean, Lord knows, let's just go through the litany. I mean, he's been interviewed by Megyn Kelly. He's been interviewed by George Stephanopoulos. He's been interviewed by Chris Wallace. He's been interviewed. I mean, there's a number of people who've interviewed the man over the years. Barbara Walters, I believe, did an interview with him at one time. But man, the concept that Tucker Carlson was going to do it absolutely scared people to death. And worst of all, the idea that Tucker Carlson was going to do it absent the parental controls of a major network, aka Fox News, I think that scared me worse. And so that led to the biggest bill. I mean, Tucker Carlson didn't even really need to advertise what he was doing. I mean, when pictures of him walking around in Moscow and listening to the ballet and, walking the streets and cars going in and out of the Kremlin started coming out, that would have been enough. But then he confirmed in his own separate 4-minute video what he was doing in Moscow. And he said, I'm here seeking an interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, he got his wish. The interview dropped on Thursday. And since then, at least by my count, I had a rough count of about 138 million views just on Twitter. And it was kind of amazing, the phenomenon that happened as a result of that interview dropping. I can't even begin to tell you, and I'm sure I don't have complete knowledge of all of them everywhere, but the watch parties that got organized online on various social media channels, in Twitter spaces, in people's homes, absent being on social media directly, it was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like the hunger for this interview. Oh, now if this is, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but if this is true, holy cow. I mean, it's just incredible. 138 million views, and that's just on Twitter. No, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Now it's gone higher than that. Absolutely higher than that. I mean, the numbers are, when it's all said and done, the numbers are going to be astronomical. And I don't think that's limited just to the United States. I think that the West collectively, England, France, Germany, the Western nations of Europe, and I think people all over the world want to see this interview. Now, as to the interview itself, I am no expert on video editing or anything else, so take everything I'm saying with the grain of salt that I bring to this. As far as I can tell, this is a unedited stream of consciousness interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. If it was edited, it's got to be the smoothest editing job I've ever seen in my life. You know, like I say, I'm no expert in these matters, but I mean, as far as I can tell, it's unedited. And thank God for that. This interview is historic. This interview is a masterclass, and I even hate using that word. The word doesn't even do justice to what that 2 hours is. It is an absolute teachable display of so many different things. For example, but not limited to, it's a teachable example of what a conversation should be like. It's a teachable example of good journalism. It's a teachable example of the power dynamics that go on between two individuals when they are engaged in a conflict. And I use that word very loosely. The conflict being, I want to get information out of you versus I only want you to know certain things. One side is Tucker, the other side is Putin, respectively. But the interview is historic. Now, what its place will be in history when it's all said and done, I have no idea. But for this moment in time, for what it is, it's amazing. And like I said, when I got to hear snippets of the interview on Thursday when it dropped. I mean, Brent with an N from the Dangerous Rhetoric podcast asked me if I want to sit in on a panel. Oh, hello, Leah. Hang on, I'll stop for a second and acknowledge this. Coming by, so I can't stay here long, but want to make sure drop it. Oh, I'll tell you. Love you, darling. If you stay as long as you need to, go do what you got to do. Like I say, this is definitely different than most other live streams I'm doing on Saturday. But thank you for stopping by. I genuinely appreciate it. That interview is so many different things. And like I said, when I got to listen to bits and pieces of it on Thursday. Brent from the Dangerous Rhetoric podcast asked me to join him on a watch party. And I couldn't get there till the tail end of it because I had, work stuff going on, personal stuff going on, errands to run. But I tried to listen to as much as I could. And today I finally got to sit down and listen to this thing in its entirety. And the interview is extraordinary. I mean, I know I'm sitting here gushing on going on about it, but I mean, I watched this thing and I'm like, my God, this is what good journalism ought to be. This is what information ought to be. Now, that said, I use the word information. I can almost hear right now some people out there, oh, come on, can't you tell Putin is propagandizing? Putin's going to use this thing to push his point of view. Okay, yes, he's going to give you his point of view. Is he wrong? Oh, you're a Putin simp. You're just sucking up to Putin. I'm not sucking up to anybody. I will state it again right now, as I've always said throughout all of this. I am not pro Putin. I am not pro Zelensky. I am not pro Russia. I am not pro Ukraine. I am pro American. I am pro free speech. I am pro the free exchange of ideas. We, the American people, and people all over the world for that matter, have the intelligence and the discernment to be able to listen to what someone like Vladimir Putin says, analyze his statements against historically known facts, and come up with their own conclusions about his truthfulness. And Leah, you bring up a fabulous point, and I'm going to get to that next about Putin. It's pretty a telltale for the state of our country when the more coherent interview that night was done by a dictator than our own president. Oh, sister, you preach truth. You preach truth. Yeah, and John, I'm pro keeping my money. Exactly. Thank you very much. Hello, loser. Glad to have you. Now, as to Vladimir Putin himself, it is, I don't think, beyond question that in the 20 plus years he has been involved in Russian politics, the leader of his country, it's fair, very fair to say the man has made consequential difference in his nation and on the world stage. As I watched the interview, here are the following words that came to my mind when it came to Putin. These are just stuff I just jotted down. Very intelligent, very well spoken, very confident, firm, in control, trying to act in good faith, broad view of his neighbors in the world, clear-eyed, insightful. Now, I have a question. Of all the things that you just heard me say about Vladimir Putin, how many of them have you ever heard from Western media who would say the same thing? And I'm not trying to elevate myself on a pedestal here. I'm just trying to ask a fair question. How often have you ever heard any of that stuff described of a Putin? Now, there's been a lot of, I think, caricatures made of the man, but I don't think people really know him in the West, if it is possible to know someone who is a world leader. Maybe one or two of those. Maybe. I think that's fair. That's very fair. But the interview was historic, just extraordinarily historic. And like I said, literally, I'll hold it up here. I got 4 pages of stuff that I've clipped. And we're going to try and go through this as much as we possibly can. Yeah, and you know what? Trump's not wrong. He's very smart, extremely smart. Putin is a very cagey operator. Two other things before we get into all these clips. Number one, I don't care if it's me. I don't care who it is. There is no way that we can chop up these clips and really do justice to the whole thing. For anybody who watches this live stream, and I mean this in all sincerity, don't get me wrong. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you are watching this live right now. What I'm doing, I'm glad you're going to watch this live stream somewhere down the line. But I really wholeheartedly recommend you carve out about 2 hours and 15 minutes for yourself and watch this thing uninterrupted in its entirety. I'm not saying you've got to agree with Putin. I'm not saying you have to disagree with him. I'm not saying you got to like Tucker, dislike Tucker, etc. I'm saying for your own intellectual benefit, you need to watch this uninterrupted with an open mind. And then if you want to fact check the hell out of Vladimir Putin for everything he says, go for it. I'm also going to do something else right now before we even get started with this. There's a biblical expression that says, let everything be confirmed by the mouth of 2 or more witnesses. Well, I'm about to give you the 2 or more witnesses, okay? One of them I'm putting right now in chat 2 links to 2 different YouTube videos. And I would incorporate this into what I'm doing now. I just didn't have the time. Because that's just how substantive that interview with Putin is. One of the clips is a lecture that Professor John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago gave in June of 2022, about 3 months after the Ukraine war began. The other is a lecture from July of 2018 that was given by a very famous semi-retired journalist named Vladimir Posner. And the reason that I include these links in chat, and I'll probably do it a couple or 3 times before this is over with, is if you want bookends to help you fact check independently what Putin's saying in this interview, then I cannot recommend to you enough the lecture by Posner in 2018 and the lecture by Mearsheimer in 2022. I'm not going to say they confirm everything you're going to hear from Putin in this interview with Tucker Carlson, but they're going to back him up quite a bit as far as the facts that Putin's laying out. So watch the Putin interview, watch the Mearsheimer lecture, watch the Posner lecture, because all 3 of them, I mean, don't get me wrong, we're going to deal with just one big thing tonight. But that interview, that lecture by Posner in 2018, even before the Ukraine war started, and that lecture by Mearsheimer 3 months after the war started, bookend this interview perfectly. As a matter of fact, I'll put these links in the description for this live stream when I'm done. But yeah, it cannot be said enough how historic this interview is of Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin. So let's just get to it. Okay, I've set this thing up enough. Let's get into it. We start with something of a history lesson. And as a matter of fact, John McGarvey brings this up. Even though I was a little annoyed at the history lesson Putin gave, I'm actually glad I didn't skip it. I didn't know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And most, if not all of this can be fact checked. I mean, like I said, that's the amazing thing about the reaction from people in the West. They're all like, he's going to propagandize. He's going to say stuff. Yeah, he's going to say stuff that you can actually fact check. I mean, do our leaders in the West believe that we are so devoid of brains and common sense that we don't have the ability to open up a book or read something for ourselves to determine whether or not someone's telling us the truth or whether or not they're lying to us? Or maybe that's what they're afraid of. Anyway, all right, let's get into it. No, that's true. That is true. That is a very important caveat, Robert, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That is true. But in general, we have the ability to fact check what someone's saying to us. Okay, let's get into this. The first clip I'm going to play is what I call the Putin history lesson. And it's a comment that Tucker makes about the overall interview itself. But I want you to listen to why Tucker thinks that Putin took about 20 minutes at the start of this thing to give an absolute history lesson. So let's start from there. Let me get everything cranked up here. Okay. This is the first clip, and it runs about, call it 30, 45 seconds. So here and by the way, let me know in chat if the volume on this is okay. So here we go.
One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine. So our opinion would be to view it in that light, as a sincere expression of what he thinks.
Okay. So that is the setup. Okay. First question. Is volume okay on this thing? Are we good? Everybody's hearing it. It's coming through okay. I just want to make sure. I mean, I don't want to disappoint or anything else here, but yeah, I mean, and for what it's worth, that phrase, good faith effort, I think, and again, I'm not trying to be naive. I'm trying to be a little low. Okay, a little low, she says. I'll see what I can do about that as this goes on. Okay, that's cranked as high as it will go. Let me see if there's any other thing I can do here for volume. But anyway, yeah. Loser says volume is bueno. Okay, all right, fair enough. Gypsy, I promise, if I can pump the volume on that thing, I'll do it or try to figure out how to do it. But anyway, you see where this is going. I think there were good faith efforts on the part of Putin as far as trying to have this dialogue with Tucker Carlson. I really do. I really do believe that. And I think you're going to see that throughout this. Okay. So that gets us to our next clip, which I refer to as Putin setting the tone. And this one's kind of interesting. Let me just make sure I've got this thing. Yeah, I got it on the right place. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, this interview is a lot of different things, and it's a masterclass in the power dynamics between two individuals. So that sets up what I call Putin setting the tone. Take a listen to this.
On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote.
Okay, did you catch that? I thought, personally, that was one of the best lines very early on in this interview. I did not say that. Are we having a serious discussion or is this a talk show? That's great. One other adjective I should have used about Putin. Man's got a very sly sense of humor. He really does. It's not yuck comedy, but he has a very sly understated, pointed sense of humor. And you just got an example of that. Are we having serious discussion or is this talk show? That cracked me up. Anyway, let's continue with this. So give me 1 second here. Yeah, in Russia, he busts your chops. Chops bust you. Exactly. It was great. Anyway, let's continue with this clip and then we'll move on to something else. I want to finish this up.
Thank you. It's a formidable series.
Да, это серьезный разговор. Но поскольку у вас базовое образование...
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
Тогда я позволю себе...
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Okay. Now, what was just done there is not quite accurate. Putin, for the next 20 minutes or so, is not going to give you a 30-second or 1 minute answer. He's going to go into some deep, deep history. Okay. And it is, it was, I think it was Leah who said, it's amazing how, Putin didn't skip a beat, didn't miss a point. He went in his command of the facts as he presented them, which can be fact checked. Yeah. And I agree with this, Gypsy. Putin doesn't come across as an angry man, as some people in Western media will try to proclaim him. And I love this. Oh, now come on now. That's just a little bit cold-blooded. Seriously? Come on now. Well, and this is true too. At least he dropped the damn bow tie. Jesus God. Yeah. So and this is like I said, this is like 2 minutes into the interview, and we've got this much stuff. So let's move on to what I call Putin bringing the receipts. In Western society, you hear the expression, yeah, and at least he acknowledged he has a background in history. I agree with that completely. Which, by the way, Putin is remarkably well briefed on Tucker Carlson, as you might expect. He's a former KGB man. You wouldn't think he'd walk into this thing not knowing who he was talking to. But anyway, the expression that the kids use these days is bring in the receipts. In other words, what proof do you have? And I love what happens in this next clip. You hear the expression, you heard Tucker use the expression good faith effort. I think the clip that you're about to see is a lot of different things. And for my part, I interpret it as it's a good faith effort. Now watch this, and then we're going to come back and comment on it. So that sets this up, and take a listen to this.
Чтобы вы не думали, что я что-то придумал.
So that you don't think that I'm inventing things.
You hear some footsteps.
I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
Но все-таки.
But still,
Документы из архива.
these are documents from the archives, copies.
Здесь письма.
Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky,
Контролировал власть в этой
the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands
Варшаву.
that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld,
С просьбой взять их.
and after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory.
I have a question. When was the last time you ever saw a Western leader do something akin to what Vladimir Putin just did here with an American journalist in Tucker Carlson? Oh, come on, Front Porch. You're reading too much into this. You got rose-colored glasses on where Putin is concerned. No, I'm not. I'm really not. I'm not trying to see Vladimir Putin for anything more than what he is. And I mean that in all sincerity. Look, Putin is a lot of things. He can also be a ruthless SOB. believe me, 20 plus years of history on the world stage, he's done some things over the years that if you don't think this is one tough customer, go back and read this guy's history. But the man is willing to make copies from Russian archives to present them to the journalist that he's talking to. He's trying to make a good faith case. Hey, there are reasons why we feel that parts of Ukraine are actually historical parts of Russia. And they get into that. And throughout this interview, I mean, Putin just spent the past, 10, 15 minutes so far in this interview talking about, well, going back to the year, 862 AD, when this person was a prince in this country and they settled here, and their grandson and then their great. I mean, it's remarkable on Putin's part, the presentation of history. So I call that little clip, bring in the receipt. Okay, now that gets to our next item of business that we see through this interview. And it's what I call, what is the point? Now, that's true. That I had forgotten about that. That's true. True. Now, this one's what I call, what's the point? And this has got interesting kinds of funny in it. So that sets us up, and here we go.
But that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations are upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made,
the case he's talking about as to why it is that Ukrainian lands are part historically of Russia. But we continue.
Which I read today.
Сейчас скажу.
You explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги, они...
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please.
As I said, this interview is any number of things, and one of them is a masterclass on the dynamics between two individuals trying to accomplish two different goals. I love that line. I realize that my answers probably fall outside the normal interview, but bear with me in that. I love watching these two guys interact with each other. I mean, lay aside who they are, lay aside what they're trying to accomplish. Here are two human beings trying to have a conversation. And one of them comes out of the West and all the things that go along with that. And one of them is a man of his culture from Eastern Europe. And watching them interact in this 2 hours is just rather extraordinary. I hope it doesn't cause an international incident, but then again, stranger things have happened. And okay, this is fair. Yeah, all right. Okay. I can see that too. I can see that. But anyway, this is setting the tone. Or what's the point? That gets us to our next clip, and this goes to the heart of the dispute between Russia and the West, as led by the United States, England, and Germany. And it has to do with the question of NATO expansion. And I want you to listen to what Putin has to say here. This runs just about a minute, but man, it is extremely, extremely informative. Folks, take a listen to what Putin thinks on this matter.
I'm coming to a very important point of today's agenda.
Этот развал Советского Союза.
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian
Я не
leadership.
знаю, чем тогда руководствовалось руководство России. Но
I do not understand
подозреваю,
what the Russian
что из
leadership
них
was guided by
составляющих,
at the time,
э,
but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine.
Первое. Ну, во-первых, я думаю, что руководство России исходило из того, что фундаментальные
I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian.
У каждого третьего какие-то родственные связи.
Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies.
Экономика очень сильно взаимосвязана.
All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable.
Я хочу, чтобы вы, как американские гражданины, чтобы
The second point is a very important one.
прежнее российское руководство
I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well.
Больше никаких разделителей.
The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines.
Инициативно пошла даже на развал Советского Союза.
Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet
Так
Union
называемом
and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and
Вот чего
association.
ожидала Россия.
Okay, now pay attention to what's said next. This runs a little longer than I thought it would, but man, this is just chock full. Now, watch what happens or what you hear next.
That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole.
В том числе и в Германии. Эгон Барр.
There were smart people, including in Germany, Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should be established in Europe.
Помочь объединиться Германии, но
Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
Yes.
But NATO needs not to expand.
And there it is. Don't expand NATO. And this will become apparent throughout this interview. That's the heart, or one of the hearts, of this dispute between Russia and the West. But let me finish up this clip.
That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all.
Больше того, он рассердился как-то.
He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. In fact, he got angry once.
Рассердился на советское руководство.
If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again.
Но, тем не менее,
Everything happened just as he had said.
Well, of course,
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there and bring it back in for some commentary. That is the heart, and has been the heart, of the dispute between Russia and the West, now going on since really, call it 1997, 1998, somewhere in there. Don't expand NATO. Now, let me explain kind of the why. And this is where I will once again, I'm putting this into chat. This is the link to that lecture from Vladimir Putin at Yale. And that lecture goes from 91, the fall of the Soviet Union, up until 2018 when Posner delivered the interview, or the lecture. And Posner does a magnificent, and I mean magnificent, job of chronicling the history between Russia and the West and the United States, and how Russia was almost adamant. No, not almost. They were. Just don't expand NATO. That's all they've wanted. And again, I'm not trying to be an apologist for Russia. They can speak for themselves. Okay? I'm just saying this is one of the heart of the dispute. And if you stop and think about it from the Russian perspective, it kind of makes sense. If your nation had been invaded by two different Western European countries over the course of 2 centuries, you'd want a buffer zone on your borders too. France in the 19th century and Germany in the 20th. And the havoc that was wreaked on the Russian people through those 2 invasions, scars are still there. Memory is still there. And I want to, loser, hang on to that, because believe it or not, that question is addressed later on in this interview. And I'm not smacking you over the head for what you're saying or anything else. I'm just telling you, this is addressed. So we'll get to it. But yeah, it's good. That's a perfectly valid point to bring up. So that is the important point. Now, the next clip I want to play runs about 3 minutes, and I apologize in advance for the length of some of these, but there's just so much meat on the bone. You just really can't chop this up. You've got to hear it in its entirety, or as much as I can present it in its entirety. And that's why I recommend to everybody, go watch this on your own. Come to your own conclusions. You know, come to your own conclusions on this. You know, and yeah, I know exactly who you're referring to. If I remember correctly, I think you're talking about Patton, but I could be wrong on that. If I am, set me straight. The next one is what I would call what the Russians, what their expectations were, and what they got from the West. And like I said, this one runs about 3 minutes. Again, I apologize for its length, but there's too much here to not let it be heard on its own. So that sets up the clip. So what did the Russians get from America after 1991? Well, take a listen to this from Putin's perspective.
Let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened.
Anybody interested? Some questions that I've got for you guys. And I know, and I've said before, and I'll say it again, I got the smartest audience on the internet. Okay. Is there anything that he presented there that you guys weren't aware of or you hadn't heard about before? And I'm not asking that question out of anything other than just genuine curiosity, because he just dropped a whole bunch of facts there that, you know, maybe it's stuff that we've forgotten about, or maybe it's, you know, maybe it's just things we're not remembering. I didn't realize until maybe a year or so ago, Russia had requested entry into NATO. And again, check out that Posner lecture, because that's something he talks about. Not only did Russia at one time request entrance into NATO, they requested entrance into the European Union. NATO wouldn't do it. European Union wouldn't do it. And again, I'm not trying to simp for Russia. I'm not trying to simp for Vladimir Putin. I'm just saying that apparently there have been historic efforts after 1991 on the part of what became the Russian Federation to try to show the West, hey, you know, we're not the old Soviet Union. Now, does that mean they don't have their own agenda? Does that mean they're not going to pursue their own interests? Does that mean that they're not trying to do things to the benefit of their country that might be detrimental to ours or someone else's? Of course not. Nations, just like people, are self-interested. But the fact that that the Russians were trying to actually get into NATO or become part of the European Union and become part of the family of nations, if I may use that expression, to me is very interesting. And what did they get for their efforts? I mean, the conversation with Bill Clinton, I didn't know about. Bill's sitting there going, hey, yeah, I think this would be a good idea. And then later in the, I don't think we can do that. I just think there's a lot, like I said, this interview is just pure, good old-fashioned meat on the bone. That's true. That's true. Fair point. Fair point. The Russians aren't the same as they once were, and we most certainly aren't the same as we once were. That's a completely fair point. Well, that's true. I'll give you that. I'll give you that one. I'll give you that. Which sort of goes to a question that I've had and I've been thinking about for a while. And granted, it's now 30 years too late. But when the Soviet Union fell apart, should we really have kept NATO? And again, I know it's almost 6 o'clock on Saturday night. This is a fairly heady topic of conversation to be getting into. But should we really have kept NATO? Or should we have been a part of NATO? The threat was over. You know, it's just a thought, just something to throw out there. Anyway, now, some people will make the argument, or maybe have made the argument, I'm not saying it's anybody here necessarily, that, you know, Putin's a Russian, therefore he's never going to have good relations with any of the leaders of the West, particularly the American presidents. Well, I'm going to play you about a almost 2-minute clip where Vladimir Putin has a very interesting comment to make about George W. Bush. Now, I had always heard from George W. Bush that, you know, he and Putin got along very well together. Okay. But I'd never really heard it from Vladimir Putin's side. But the comment that he makes, the comments he makes as it relates to George W. Bush, again, are really very interesting. And I pulled this one up just for that purpose. So give me 1 second here. And here we go. Take a listen to this, and I want you guys to tell me what you think. Check this out.
Nevertheless, after that, we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq. We were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus. But they continue to do it anyway. And political support, information support, financial support, even military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus. I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, it's impossible. Do you have proof?
Now, what he's referring to, if I understand my geography correctly, and keep in mind, this is coming from his perspective. When he says the Caucasus, if I remember the area right, he's talking about Georgia, Azerbaijan, that area, it would be southern Russia. And the president he's referring to is George W. Bush. So we'll continue the clip.
I said yes. I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof. He looked at it, and you know what he said? I apologize, but that's what happened. I'll quote. He says, well, I'm gonna kick their ass. We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply. I said to the FSB director, write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President? He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply. We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, we have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it. Just ridiculous. Well, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Yeah, I think I mixed up my clips here, and for that I do apologize. But Putin goes on later in the interview, and hopefully I've got it pulled up here, that he and George W. Bush had a very good relationship. Matter of fact, Putin goes on to say, and I think I'm almost quoting him, he said, you know, a lot of people portrayed him in the press as being some kind of a cowboy, as some kind of a, you know, he didn't know what he was doing. Putin says, no, he knew very much what he was doing. Very much so. So yeah, very interesting comments. Very, very interesting. Okay. Moving on to our next clip. Again, and this has to do with the question of NATO expansion. So take a listen to this. And again, I'm going to drop some things in chat here in just a minute. And hello, Dustin. Glad to have you here with us tonight. I also suppose, given that's the top of the hour, I'll do a real quick commercial. My name is Brian Trippett, and I am known on social media as the Front Porch Conservative. I am on YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter. And we're doing a review and analysis and discussion of the comments we're hearing of the interview between Vladimir Putin and Tucker Carlson. So if you're not a subscriber to my channel, and you've just found your way over here, glad to have you. Please consider giving me a sub. And you can sub to me on YouTube. You can sub to me on Rumble. Okay, let's get into this clip. And let's see what Putin's got to say further about this question of NATO expansion. This runs about a little under 2 minutes. So here we go.
But it wasn't us. We proposed to go the other way, and we were pushed back. Now, about NATO's expansion to the east. Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what? They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand. So there were 5 waves of expansion, the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on. And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. Now about how decisions are made there. Germany, France seem to be against it, as well as some other European countries. But then, as it turned out later, President Bush, and he's such a tough guy, a tough politician, as I was told later, he exerted pressure on us and we had to agree. It's ridiculous. It's like kindergarten. Where are the guarantees? What kindergarten is this? What kind of people are these? Who are they? You see, they were pressed, they agreed. And then they say, Ukraine won't be in the NATO, you know? I say, I don't know. I know you agreed in 2008. Why won't you agree in the future? Well, they pressed us then. I say, why won't they press you tomorrow? And you'll agree again. Well, it's nonsensical. Who's there to talk to? I just don't understand. We're ready to talk. But with whom? Where are the guarantees? None.
This point that Putin is making, that's true. Regarding Russia's actions in Ukraine is that Russia was promised no NATO expansion. Okay, fair enough. I'll give you that. And for the sake of everyone's review, I'll drop them in chat again regarding the 2 lectures, the 2 other lectures that go along as the bookends to this thing. Both Posner in 2018 and John Mearsheimer in 2022 referenced the very same thing, that the Russians were promised, we don't want, we will not expand NATO not 1 inch beyond where it is. And yet over the course of the years from 1991 up until the invasion of Ukraine, NATO kept expanding eastward. Now, people can sit there and say it's right, it's wrong, what have you, but that's what the Russians were told. We will not expand NATO any further than where it is right now. And again, if you're the Russians, would you want somebody sitting right on your border, or want an organization sitting right on your borders whose members, 2 of them at least, have invaded your country in the course of 200 years? I mean, to me, and again, I'm just trying to ask some honest questions here. It'd be fundamentally no different than if, let's say, I don't know, China parked missiles on the Mexican border pointed toward the United States. Would we tolerate that? No, not on the slightest. Well, no, then again, considering who some of our political leaders are these days, maybe we would. But my point, you see my point. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. And as I referred to somebody else in chat, Dustin, Putin gets to the question of do you want to try and put the old Soviet Union back together? It's not asked directly that way, but it's going to get discussed. So yeah, that's a fair point, completely fair point. So we'll move on. We'll move on to our next clip. And guess what? I just got through my first page. Oh, jeez. So, like I say, I mean, I sat here for hours today going through these clips and watching that interview, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this thing is just meat on the bone, stuff for everybody to talk about, disagree about, agree about, whatever. It was remarkable to me. Yeah, and here's another perspective. An absolute another perspective. I mean, like I said, this interview is so consequential for so many different reasons, but if nothing else, it starts conversations. I mean, here we are, this group of people gathered on a social media channel, of which, hi, howdy, how are you? Glad you're here. And we're talking about this stuff, and we're bringing up points of agreement and disagreement. I mean, like I say, where this interview ranks in history long term, I have literally no idea. But if nothing else, it's giving people stuff to talk about. And I'm looking over here on Rumble, for example. Chris Bean 101 says Biden said in the 1980s NATO had a moral imperative to expand. Putin shouldn't have to give up the Crimea. They provoked Putin. Fair point. Fair point. But anyway, let's move on to our next clip. And like I say, this interview is just, to me, just extraordinary. And let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not, that in 2014, there was, now I'll use the word that's been ascribed to it. You can describe it however you wish. A coup, but basically a change of government. Okay. And Putin gets into a discussion of what some people have come to refer to as the Maidan coup. So I want you to take a listen to this, because this kind of sets up things that happen in Russia, or not Russia, but Ukraine thereafter, and how they affect relations with the Russian Federation. So that sets up the clip, and take a listen to this.
Coup d'etat was committed, although I shall not delve into details now, as I find doing it inappropriate, the US told us. Calm Yanukovych down, and we will calm the opposition. Let the situation unfold in the scenario of a political settlement. We said, all right, agreed, let's do it this way. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev. What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are? I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand.
Okay, take a look at the look on Tucker Carlson's face after Putin dropped that comment. With the backing of the CIA, the organization that I understand you wanted to join at one time. Oh my God, that was just dang. Anyway, sorry, that's just too funny.
We should thank God they didn't let you in, although it is a serious organization. I understand. My former vis-a-vis, in the sense that I served in the first main directorate, Soviet Union's intelligence service. They have always been our opponents. A job is a job.
There's one other adjective that you can always ascribe to Putin. Clear-eyed. Small-time republic, you probably are not wrong about this. You're probably right. Oh, God. Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's just, yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing. Just amazing. So basically Putin is saying, unless I'm misinterpreting this, uh, there's leadership in Ukraine. There's some kind of an uprising going on. The US comes to him and says, "Hey, look, let's de-escalate this thing." And again, this is from Putin's perspective. I have not looked into this that deeply, so I'm just saying with that caveat. So Putin's saying the US comes to him and says, "Look, we got to de-escalate this thing. You tell the president of Ukraine, don't crank out your military. Keep it. Let's just let this thing de-escalate." Putin's like, "Oh, okay, fine. Makes sense." So Putin, gets the then president of Ukraine to chill. The people committing the violence and whatever else, they don't chill. And before you know it, you got a government overthrown. Putin's sitting there going, what are you doing to me? And then Tucker's like, so whose behest was all? Well, the CIA, of course, the organization that you wanted to be a member of at one time, but thank God you didn't, but a job is a job, I understand. So anyway, what was the upshot of this coup? Okay. What did it lead to? Well, that gets to our next clip. And this one's fairly interesting. So let me get this set up. This one runs a little bit long, and I apologize in advance, but you really need to hear this. So take a listen. And again, this one runs about 2 minutes long. Having trouble keeping my list of clips together here. But anyway, take a listen to what Putin describes as the effects of the coup. And here we go.
Технически они все сделали правильно.
Technically, they did everything right. They achieved their goal of changing the government.
Talking about the CIA.
However, from a political standpoint, it was a colossal mistake. Surely it was political leadership's miscalculation. They should have seen what it would evolve into. So, in 2008, the doors of NATO were opened for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created the threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There is a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our side, this would have been a culpable negligence. That's what it would have been. It's just that the US political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross, because doing so could have ruined Russia itself. Besides, we could not leave our brothers in faith, in fact, a part of Russian people, in the face of this war machine.
Some pretty heady stuff. And again, I add the caveat, this is coming from Putin's perspective. Fair enough. I mean, like I say, I am not going to sit here and tell you the gospel, yep, this is exactly what happened, and he's either absolutely right or he's full of crap. Loser, I'm not going to dispute you on this one, and I'm not saying you're trying to dispute me. So just let me put that out there straight up. You might be very well right. Putin might be absolutely full of crap in terms of how he's interpreting the events of what happened. I'm just saying this is his perspective on it. And I'm not saying you are fighting with me, so we're cool. Over on Rumble, John McGarvey says definitely some propaganda from Putin, but at least we are hearing both sides. Exactly. That's kind of how I look at it here. Completely how I look at it. Ron Riffle says, could be right. Could be right. So that's what Putin defines as the effects of the Maidan coup. Now that gets to our next clip. Let's make sure I've got this thing pulled up correctly. It's what I call the Minsk agreements and what triggers the war. This, again, keep in mind, you're hearing this from Putin's perspective. Is there the possibility he's trying to slant it and propagandize it to the advantage of the Russians and the Russian people and himself? Absolutely. But at least you're going to be able to hear it from his side of it. So anyway, so what triggers the war and what are the Minsk agreements? This to me is interesting. So that sets it up and let's play it. Here we go. This one runs a little bit long, so I'll stop it if I think I need to. But let's hear what's said.
But that was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
Спровоцировал конфликт изначально.
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland, and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement. They just threw it in the stove right away, and nobody recalls that. I don't know if the US know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities, and its 3 guarantors who, instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me, because President Yanukovych agreed to all conditions. He was ready to hold an early election, which he had no chance of winning, frankly speaking. Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbass? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost $5 billion.
$5 billion, that's chicken feed compared to these days. Oh, I'm sorry. That was an editorial comment on my part. Sorry, folks. Let's continue.
But the political mistake was colossal. Why would they have to do that? All this could have been done legally, without victims, without military action, without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan. Because we agreed with the fact that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, our border should be along the borders of former Union's republics. We agreed to that, but we never agreed to NATO's expansion, and moreover, we never agreed that Ukraine would be in NATO. We did not agree to NATO bases there without any discussion with us. For decades, we kept asking, don't do this, don't do that. And what triggered the latest events? Firstly, the current Ukrainian leadership declared that it would not implement the Minsk agreements, which had been signed, as you know, after the events of 2014 in Minsk, where the plan of peaceful settlement in Donbass was set forth. But no, the current Ukrainian leadership, foreign minister, all other officials, and then president himself said that they don't like anything about the Minsk agreements. In other words, they were not going to implement it. A year or a year and a half ago, former leaders of Germany and France said openly to the whole world that they indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose.
Was there anyone for you to talk to? Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, we're going to act?
Мы постоянно об этом говорили. Мы постоянно об этом говорили. Мы обращались к
We talked about this all the time.
европейских стран.
We addressed the United States and European countries' leadership to stop these developments immediately, to implement the Minsk agreements.
Откровенно говоря,
Frankly speaking, I didn't know how we were going to do this, but I was ready to
они
implement them.
сложные для Украины.
These agreements were complicated for Ukraine. They included lots of elements of those Donbas territories' independence. That's true. However, I was absolutely confident, and I'm saying this to you now. I honestly believe that if we managed to convince the residents of Donbas, and we had to work hard to convince them to return to the Ukrainian statehood, then gradually the wounds would start to heal. When this part of territory reintegrated itself into common social environment, when the pensions and social benefits were paid again, all the pieces would gradually fall into place. No, nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted to resolve the issue by military force only. But we could not let that happen. And the situation got to the point when the Ukrainian side announced, no, we will not do anything. They also started preparing for military action. It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this war. And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Now, there's a lot of things packed in that 5 minutes. And I'm not going to sit here and try and paint myself to be, some great European historian. I'm not going to sit here and try and say he's absolutely right, he's absolutely wrong. I'm presenting it. I mean, you guys can watch it for yourself, and I highly recommend you do as much research as you want to do on it. Do your research on it. I mean, from you got the perspective that this is some serious BS from Putin. Okay, you're free to hold that opinion completely. Gypsy's got a real good point. Yeah, fair enough. John, I don't know if you're referring to me or people in the media. So, I mean, and I'm not mad one way or the other. So don't get me wrong. Speak your piece. But yeah, the Minsk agreements from 2014, according to Putin's side of it, Zelensky and the current leadership in Ukraine are like, nope, we're not going to do it. We're not going to implement any of this. Putin's standing there going, well, this is stuff that's been agreed to by your previous leaders of your government. Again, like I said, it's a 5-minute clip. There's a lot to unpack in that, and people will look up and down this thing and see, who's right and who's wrong. But like I say, I think it's just extraordinary. We're able to hear this unfettered. I mean, could you imagine if Tucker Carlson were still at Fox and try to get a 2-hour interview like this on the network? It never happened. They'd chop, slice, and dice that thing so bad it'd be ridiculous. Even though Tucker would try and keep as much control over it as he possibly could, as far as the content, I mean. So, one of the other things you may have heard, and I've heard throughout all this, is a question about denazification. There are Nazis in Ukraine. Been a lot going on about that. So Tucker asks him, pretty interesting question. I think if I remember the setup to this one correctly. So, what are Putin's goals as far as Europe is concerned? Oh, okay. All right. I thought that's where you were going with it. I just want to make sure. Oh, but I will say this. The mainstream media has spent a lot of time trashing this interview. Like I said, I've never seen anything like the build up to the interview from the mainstream media, and haven't seen anything like the blowback off of this. The blowback off of this post interview. I mean, it's just remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. So anyway, denazification. What's that all about? Well, okay, we've got a clip for that. Check this out.
You've stopped it now? I mean, have you achieved your aims?
Talking about the military questions.
No, we haven't achieved our aims yet, because one of them is denazification. This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year. And it was not our initiative, because we were told by the Europeans, in particular, that it was necessary to create conditions for the final signing of the documents. My counterparts in France and Germany said, "How can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads? The troops should be pulled back from Kiev." I said, "All right." We withdrew the troops from Kiev. As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe. That is how the situation has developed, and that is how it looks now.
Okay. So Tucker asks him the question, have you achieved all of your military goals where Ukraine is concerned? I mean, are you satisfied with the territories that, by military force you have obtained? Putin's like, nope. There's one other thing that goes along with it. And Ukraine needs to denazify. And he goes into some explanations there. But the other thing that I thought was fascinating about this clip, and again, this is just me. And again, stuff I need to go fact check as much as I possibly can. They were negotiating a settlement to this thing. And this is part of historical record. And for this, I will put John Mearsheimer's, the link to that lecture by John Mearsheimer. Now, I'll put this out there. You can watch it at your convenience. But they were at the negotiating table. And again, keep in mind, this is coming from Putin's side of it. Putin says, hey, people are telling me that hey, how can you ask the Ukrainians to sign off on a truce, a settlement on this thing? And, when you're holding troops right on the border of their capital. And again, this is from Putin's perspective. Take it for what it's worth. Putin's like, okay, pulls the troops back. And then all of a sudden, the negotiations at Istanbul between the Ukrainians and the Russians just break down. Again, I'm just saying, this is what he's saying. Take it for what it's worth. Now, in response to that answer about denazification, partial justification for his aggression is very smart. He knows how this appeals to the woke attitudes dominating our culture. Okay. Well, but in all fairness, though, this thing about Nazis in Ukraine, and this is not, there's been other news sources on this. I don't have them at my fingertips to be able to drop into the chat. This is something that's been talked about in Ukraine for a while now, and not necessarily by wokies or lefties either. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not trying to argue with you, loser. I'm just saying that's just from another side of it. And that's absolutely true. Absolutely. I haven't got the clip pulled up, but there's a part in here where Putin goes on a pretty good rant as it relates to Nazi philosophy and everything else that goes along with it. But anyway, so Tucker, in response to this comment from Putin about denazification in Ukraine, asks him something that I think is fairly interesting. And it's a pretty good pushback, I will argue. Pretty good pushback from my perspective. So that sets this up. And I want you to listen to the question that's asked and the answer that's given. It runs about a little under 4 minutes. Again, I apologize for the length of some of these clips, but some of this stuff is just too meaty. A lot of meat on the bone to just try and chop it up in like 20 or 30-second clips. So anyway, I'll stop it as I feel is necessary, but here you go. Take a listen to this.
Have now.
Нет, закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification.
Замалчивается на Западе.
Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. The story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries.
Спикер парламента.
The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said,
Во время Второй мировой
fought
войны
against the
воевал
Russians
против
during the World War II.
Гитлер.
Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II?
Выяснилось, что это человек,
Hitler
который
and his
как
accomplices.
SS. Он лично
It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews.
Они занимались
The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man. How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism. But how? How do you do that?
And there's the pushback question. This I thought was a good question on the part of Tucker Carlson. Anyway, let's continue.
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very
Можно я
subtle,
скажу, как я думаю?
and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий. Он
I love that look on Tucker's face. Of course I'm not offended. Please go on.
очень противный, этот вопрос.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
люди, которые
80 years.
Уничтожали
But his
евреев,
example lives
русских,
on.
поляков, живы.
People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive.
Сегодняшней Украины
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian parliament, gives a standing ovation.
Целиком выкручивает
Can we
эту
say that
идеологию,
we have
если
completely
то, что мы
uprooted
видим,
this
происходит
ideology
сегодня?
if what we see is
Вот что
happening
такое
today?
денацификация в нашем
That is what
Надо
denazification
избавиться от
is
этих
in
людей,
our
которые,
understanding.
эту
We have to get rid of those people who
теорию,
maintain
практику
this concept and support this
оставляют
practice
в жизни
and
и
try to
стараются
preserve it.
сохранить.
That
Вот
is
что
what
такое
denazification
денацификация.
is.
Вот
That
что под
is
этим
what we
понимаем.
mean.
Right. My question was a little more specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вы знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле,
You know,
что переговоры
as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that
что
we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carson, we agreed on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process. And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it?
Oh,
That is it.
Ведь нет, правда? Вот и всё.
will there
Okay. A lot to unpack there. Again, take it for what it's worth. This is coming from Putin's side of it. And I want to ask a question. I'm not trying to be unkind to anybody. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be haughty or anything else. Has anybody really heard this kind of an interview done with Putin ever since all this got started? Maybe they've tried. Maybe the mainstream press is right. They've reached out to the Russians, and the Russians are like, nope, don't want to talk to you. Could be. But have you ever really heard Putin give this side of it? And again, he might be propagandizing. He might be, leaving out half the facts, telling half truths. He might be spreading disinformation. Maybe. Be nice, y'all. Play nice in the sandbox, please. But yeah, this is interesting conversation to me. This is fascinating conversation to me. So yeah, I find this to be absolutely fascinating. So they get into the question after having that discussion. Yeah, he is. He is. I'll agree with that. Good interview, and he could be biased. I can see both sides of that comment. Both parts could be equally true. So, what does the end of this war look like, or negotiations? Okay, good question. Glad you asked, because I'm sure everybody in the world's thinking about it. Oh, this is it's not being recommended by the algorithm. Yeah, I'll absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree with that, John McGarvey. So negotiations to end this thing, what's it look like? Well, Tucker brings it up. It's a fairly good question. So let's talk about it. Take a listen to this, because this comment's fairly interesting. Check this out.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine? Peace talks.
Они были, они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions in a complex process, but still they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I have already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end. Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting forward some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
Well,
okay. Again, you got to have a dialogue, and apparently they're not at this point. Again, this is Putin's side of it. And I'm going to drop that Mearsheimer one more time, because I think that is, if I remember correctly, it is addressed in Mearsheimer's lecture. By the way, another place I'll recommend for you is the Duran. And I think Gypsy will speak for these fellas. The boys from the Duran are fantastic, especially on the question of European politics. K Bean says it's kind of tragic. So many Americans are having to get more truth from what's considered the enemy because our news sources can't be trusted. Oh, you are so right on that point. Absolutely so right on that point. Now, John, you bring up something that is, you're actually very prescient. No, not Duran. Goofy. The Duran. Alex Macoris and Alexander Cristofaro. Fantastic. Oh, yes. Yes. Gypsy, I knew you were gonna say something like that. And I agree. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard about it. The fellas from the Duran, Alexander Cristofaro and excuse me, I'm screwing this up. Alex Cristofaro and Alexander Macoris, there we go, are two of the best analysts on European politics. They have a social media channel on YouTube and Rumble and other places called the Duran. I recommend them to you because they've been covering this thing wall to wall ever since it got started back in 2022. Go check out their analysis because they are extremely informative. Now, to get to back to something John said before he threw my train of thought with his joke. That's okay. I love you, man. I'm not giving you grief. Could he even understand Biden if they did talk? Funny you should ask that question because Tucker asks Putin, when was the last time you talked to Biden? And this answer is just really interesting. Hang on, let me get this thing pulled up. You're going to love this when you hear it. And again, keep in mind, this is coming from Putin. Take it with the grain of salt that it deserves. I'm just saying. But Tucker asks the question, when's the last time you talked to Biden? I want you to listen to this because this is very telling. Check this out.
Well, but you wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
Now, I grant you, Tucker's laughing at this, and in one sense, I can kind of understand why he's laughing. Personally, it have been me. I hope I would have had the good decency not to do that in front of Putin or any other world leader, but I kind of get why he did it, and you'll understand why he's laughing here in just seconds. Let's continue.
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Okay, that's what you call smack and smack back, but that's just me. Let's continue.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there in Ukraine by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and
I don't know about you, but I don't see Joe Biden talking to Tucker Carlson anytime soon or answering Tucker's question. By the way, when was the last time he talked to old Vlad? But we continue.
ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022.
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yes.
Okay, let me stop here and kind of explain what that comment was about the missile defense system. I didn't pull it up. I didn't pull it up on in here because it believe me, I've got like, I'm not kidding, I got 27 or 28 clips just on this sheet just for this interview, and it would have just tacked on some more. But Putin refers to the fact that in the early 2000s, he was talking to Americans about developing a missile defense system. And, Bush liked, according to him, again, this is Putin's side of it. Bush liked the idea, yada, yada, yada. But when it got down to, the whole thing being negotiated with then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Robert Gates, who was then the Secretary of Defense, and a few other people, it just kind of fell apart. So that's what Putin's referring to on the missile defense system. He was in the hopes that, there could be like a joint effort on this thing, which unfortunately didn't materialize. But anyway, let's continue. And by the way, if you're not checking out this dude on Twitter, you're missing some of the best posts and stuff that'll absolutely crack you up. How you doing, Ricky? Good to see you tonight, brother. Glad you're joining us. Anyway, had to say hello to the toad. Anyway, let's continue. And here we go.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here. If you are interested in what Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
Now, that's a fair question. Completely fair question. Listen to how Putin responds to this. This is very interesting.
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat, we have contacts through various agencies. I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the U.S. leadership. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what messages do you get back?
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine. Oh, I'm afraid. Please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think
that was an amazing little clip? I mean, I know it ran long, and I apologize. So you have my apologies in advance, but that's just a very telling clip. Now, you would think that given the fact that there is a major conflict in the world going on, that, even though Biden may not like Putin or hate his guts or whatever, you'd think there'd be a red phone like back in the old days sitting on the president's desk and asking, at least there's some talk with each other. It's like, hey, Vlad, where you guys at on this thing? It's something. They haven't talked to each other since 2022, at least according to Putin. Now, I could see, like is said in this clip, there's back channel communication between secretaries of state and undersecretaries and stuff like that. But they're not talking to each other. That's a little frightening. Let me see some of the comments here. Hang on a minute. No, to answer your question, or no, the START treaty, you mean? No, not that I'm aware of. No, they did not get into that in this interview. No. Yeah, just amazing. Looking over here on Rumble. Yeah, all kinds of good comments about should have abolished NATO years ago, etc. I'm not surprised at all that they're not talking to each other. Sad, but they're not talking. So, next clip. And this has to do with comments that are made here in the West. Let me see if I can get this pulled up. Oh, come on. Where'd you go? Where are you? Hang on. Oh, here it is. Okay. So Tucker brings up the question, what do you say to this? Oh, wait a minute. Now I remember why. Hang on. Put that paper away too soon. Ah, here it is. Yeah. Somebody asked the question a little bit earlier. Is Putin got a Jones to try and put the old Soviet Union back together, or I should say the old Iron Curtain, the Warsaw Pact? And that's a fair question. I think it's something, and that's an argument that's been made about one of the reasons why we need to support Ukraine in the midst of what they're doing. Okay. And this is actually asked. So give me a second here. I want you guys to listen to this because this is a question that Tucker directly asks of Putin. You know, aren't you worried that all this is going to lead to a bigger military conflict? I want you to listen to this because this is asked and answered directly. So check this out.
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just
How dare you call me a Philistine? But we continue.
Smart people understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat-mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine. He has territorial aims across the continent. And you're saying unequivocally you don't.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war. And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious. There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow, Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow, Russia will use that. No, the day after tomorrow. So what? In order to extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war. The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
So what do you guys think? Now, granted, this is Putin's perspective, but he's flat out saying, okay, hang on. Very interesting perspective, Dustin. I appreciate that. Very interesting. Now, I like this. You could be right. Maybe he's not lying. And by the way, I want to take off on this for just a second. One of the reasons given, there's a lot of reasons why the old Soviet Union fell apart. And John Mearsheimer, the professor on international relations from the University of Chicago, speaks to this brilliantly in various places. Part of the reason that it fell apart was they didn't have the manpower to maintain that much territory. There's no way you can do it. I mean, think about it from the Russians' perspective. And again, I'm not trying to simp for Vladimir Putin. I'm not trying to simp for Russia. But look at it from their perspective. Right now, laying aside this problem they've got with a war in Ukraine, which is very serious. I'm not saying it's not. But in another sense, if they didn't have that going on, they'd be fat and happy. Economies for them is going real good. The ruble is strong against other currencies in the world. They're enjoying, relative prosperity, however you want to define that for the Russian people. Even outside analysts acknowledge that. Why would you want to take all that away just so you can go around conquering everything in Europe, spread your manpower out too thin, have to spend money on resources you really don't need to, for what? Reconstituting the old Soviet empire? That's crazy. And Putin's saying here, I have no desire to get into any kind of a larger conflict. I love the question about Poland. And Tucker's like, is there any circumstance? What? You're kidding me. YouTube has just shut me down? You are kidding me. They have just shut me down on YouTube over a copyright. Oh my God, I don't believe this. I cannot believe it. Where? Where, I ask you? I don't believe this. Holy cow. Oh, I'm waiting for them to give me, I'm waiting for them to tell me. Yeah, Gypsy, I just saw it. I just saw it, dear. Okay. Everybody head over to Rumble. I guess. Unbelievable. I'll do my best to monitor the chat on Rumble. I don't believe it. Well, yeah, I can believe it too. Unbelievable. Wow. Dustin says it's still working for, I don't know. Hang on. I'm going to go try and find it real fast. I got to see this. I'm not saying anybody's wrong, but this is just incredible. Hang on, guys. I'll be right with you. I promise. We're not frozen. I'm just looking for something real fast. Frozen. I'm just looking for something real fast. No, YouTube's back up. Frozen. I'm just looking for something real fast. Okay. No. Okay. I'm sorry about that, folks. I don't know what the heck just happened. I do not know what the heck just happened. Anti-fragile over on Chris Bean says anti-fragile. Wow. Okay. That was weird. That was just straight weird. Woo-wee. Holy cow. Oh my gosh. Okay. When the stream is over, guys, if not tonight, it'll be tomorrow morning. I'm going to be messaging somebody on Twitter about this. This is crazy. This is just crazy. So I'm sorry about that. I really do apologize. They know likey us talk about that. You got that right, sister. Oh my God. Boy, wait till Brent with an N and Daniel from the Dangerous Rhetoric podcast hear about this? Well, that's true too. Will, look, there are reasons why Old Uncle Front Porch streams simultaneously on multiple platforms. It's for moments just like this. I'm not saying I'm the smartest. I'm not saying I'm the brightest bulb that ever came out of the box, but I'd like to think I've got enough wattage to know when this could happen. You are absolute loser. You ain't kidding. Anyway, wow, unbelievable. Anyway, that was crazy. All right, let's get back to what we were doing. So you heard the question about, are you worried that this is going to lead to a wider conflict, et cetera, so on. Well, then that gets into another interesting clip. Did you guys hear the other day Chuck Schumer make the statement that we've got to give this money to Ukraine, otherwise we're going to have American soldiers over there? Did you guys hear about that? Well, that question, that comment comes up in this interview. So that sets up what you're going to hear next. Okay, Gypsy's heard about it. All right, y'all, check this out. This is interesting.
One of our senior United States senators from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, said yesterday, I believe, that we have to continue to fund the Ukrainian effort, or U.S. soldiers, citizens could wind up fighting there. How do you assess that?
Это провокация.
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that.
Американские солдаты должны воевать.
I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place and mercenaries from Georgia in third place.
Безусловно.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
You know, it amazes me that a Russian president is speaking more sense than most American politicians. It really does. It boggles the mind. The point's valid. Fair enough. Fair enough. Completely fair enough. He didn't. I'll go ahead and answer your question for you, loser. Unfortunately, he really didn't. But the point you make is fair. You're kidding me. They bounced me again? Oh, this is just crazy. Wow. Well, let's see what their answer is this time. Well, they haven't updated me with any new emails about it. Okay, well, you know what? Well, I can disconnect this one. I can disconnect it from YouTube. Everybody, if you're on YouTube, go over to Rumble right now. Enough of this. Enough of this. Go to Rumble. Hang on. Y'all keep talking for a second. I'll be right with you. I don't, oh my God. Sorry, folks. I'm just double checking something here real quick. Sorry, folks. I'm just double checking something here real quick. Now I'm in YouTube right now. Sorry, folks. I'm just double checking something here real quick. And now I'm in YouTube right now. Sorry, folks. I'm just double checking something here real quick. And now I'm in YouTube right now. Sorry, folks. I'm just double checking something here real quick. And okay. Enough of this. Go over to YouTube. Go over to Rumble. Go over to Rumble. Everybody right now, do me a favor. Go to Rumble. Enough of this. Now it says it's live again. Okay, I'm just going forward. My advice to everybody, if you want to stay in YouTube, that's cool. Yeah, YouTube's being very gay right now, Gypsy. You're absolutely right. I'm going to still keep YouTube up, okay? So I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe somebody will. No, I believe you, John. I absolutely believe you. I absolutely believe you got the screenshots to prove it. Purdue over on Rumble says, Putin not blowing smoke. I believe the man is telling the truth. We all know how our government will lie to us. There you go. So we're going to keep this thing up on YouTube. I don't know what they're going to do here, but we're going to keep going. And, you know, like I say, this is the first time I've ever run into something like this. I know others. It's when you play the clips. Well, how am I supposed to have a conversation? And Gypsy, I'm not saying you're wrong, but how am I supposed to have a conversation? All right, you know what? I'll solve this problem. Everybody right now, if you're in YouTube, go over to Rumble. Go over to Rumble, because in about 15 seconds, I'm shutting down the YouTube portion of this, and we'll continue this on Rumble. Robert, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, we're taking it out. I'm taking down the YouTube side of this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.